The unexpected delivery. Jacob Harris wiped his hands on a greasy rag and leaned back in his chair, staring at the glowing screen of his tablet. The auction site was sketchy at best, with its vague descriptions and absurd promises, but Jacob was no stranger to taking risks. His eyes lit up when he saw the listing. Ancient interstellar artifact. Rare, one of a kind. He didn't think twice. The price was low, suspiciously low, but Jacob figured it was worth a shot. His garage was already filled with odd collectibles, from broken drones to old spaceship parts. This artifact, whatever it was, would be the crown jewel of his collection. With a smirk, he clicked, "Buy now." The next day, a delivery truck rumbled into his driveway, carrying a massive reinforced crate. Jacob's heart raced. This was bigger than he'd imagined. He waved to the driver, who barely acknowledged him before speeding off. The crate had no markings, just a single blinking panel that pulsed with a faint blue light. "What did I just buy?" Jacob muttered. He grabbed a crowbar and pried the crate open. Inside, something unexpected shimmered in the dim light, a cocoon-like structure, glowing softly with intricate patterns etched into its surface. Jacob's curiosity turned to unease. This wasn't just a collector's item. It was alive. The cocoon began to shift. Jacob jumped back, dropping the crowbar. The surface of the cocoon peeled open like a flower, and within it lay a figure, an alien woman. Her skin was a pale, iridescent blue, her hair cascading in silver waves, and her eyes, still closed, were framed by delicate feather-like lashes. She was stunning, but also completely out of place in Jacob's dingy workshop. He crouched closer, his breath catching in his throat. "Hello, can you hear me?" Her eyes snapped open, glowing a piercing violet. Jacob stumbled back, nearly tripping over his toolbox. She sat up slowly, her movements fluid and precise. For a moment, they just stared at each other, neither saying a word. Then she spoke. "They're coming." Jacob blinked. "What? Who's coming?" She didn't answer. Instead, she scanned the room with a sharp, calculating gaze, as if assessing her surroundings. Her hands, slender and tipped with faintly glowing nails, moved to the edge of the crate. She stepped out, unsteady but determined. You can't just walk around like that." Jacob stammered. "What if someone sees you?" The alien woman turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You must hide me. If they find me, they will kill us both." Jacob's pulse quickened. This was way out of his league. He wasn't a hero or a fighter. He was a mechanic, a guy who tinkered with junk and sold scrap parts to pay the bills. But there was something in her voice, a mixture of fear and urgency, that made him hesitate. Okay, he said, raising his hands. "Let's figure this out. First, who are you? And what are you doing in my garage?" She tilted her head, her violet eyes locking onto his. "My name is Araya. I was taken. Sold. You purchased the crate, but you were not meant to receive me. It was a mistake." Jacob groaned, running a hand through his messy hair. "Great. So now I'm caught up in some kind of intergalactic trafficking scheme. Fantastic." Before Araya could respond, a low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Jacob turned toward the window and saw a black, unmarked vehicle pulling up outside. Its sleek design and tinted windows screamed trouble. "They're here," Araya said, her voice trembling slightly. Jacob's survival instincts kicked in. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back of the garage. "There's a trapdoor under the workbench. It leads to the old storm shelter. Go." She hesitated for a moment, then followed his lead. They ducked into the small, cramped space just as the garage door rattled violently. Whoever was outside wasn't knocking. They were trying to break in. Jacob's hand shook as he locked the trapdoor above them. The storm shelter was dark and musty, filled with old tools and forgotten supplies. Araya crouched beside him, her glowing eyes the only source of light. You brought them here, Jacob whispered harshly. What do they want? They want me, she replied. I carry information they cannot allow to be revealed. If they capture me, Earth will suffer. Jacob's jaw tightened. He didn't understand half of what she was saying, but one thing was clear. He was in deep trouble. The sounds of footsteps echoed above them, heavy and deliberate. Whoever these people were, they weren't here for small talk. Araya reached out, placing a hand on Jacob's arm. Do not be afraid. I will protect you. Jacob laughed bitterly. Protect me. Lady, you're the one hiding in my storm shelter. But as the footsteps grew closer, he realized he wasn't just scared for himself. He was scared for her. Whatever mess she was in, she didn't deserve to be hunted like this. And somehow, against all logic, he felt responsible. The trapdoor creaked, and Jacob held his breath. This was only the beginning, but he already knew his life would never be the same. A secret chase. The workshop was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against Jacob's ears and made his skin crawl. The trapdoor above their heads groaned slightly as heavy boots moved across the floor. He could hear low voices, speaking in a language he didn't understand. It wasn't just one person. It sounded like a whole team. Araya leaned closer to him, her glowing violet eyes fixed on the trapdoor. They are not human, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Their technology is advanced. They will find us if we stay here. Jacob's pulse hammered in his chest. What do you mean, not human? You're saying there's more like you. Not like me, she said sharply. They are hunters. Machines made of flesh and code, designed for one purpose, elimination. He didn't like the sound of that. He didn't like any of this. Just yesterday, his biggest worry had been scraping together enough credits to pay his rent. Now he was hiding in a musty storm shelter with an alien woman while God knows what stalked them overhead. A sudden crash shattered the silence. The trapdoor buckled slightly as something heavy slammed into it from above. Jacob flinched, his hand instinctively grabbing the rusted wrench beside him. Useless, but comforting. They found us, Araya said, her tone grim. No kidding, Jacob hissed. You got a plan, or is this where we die? Araya didn't answer. Instead, she pressed her hands against the wall of the shelter. A faint electric hum filled the space as the metal began to glow under her touch. Jacob watched in stunned silence as a section of the wall shimmered and then dissolved, revealing a dark tunnel leading into the unknown. You had a hidden escape route this whole time? Jacob asked, incredulous. It is not your escape route, Araya said. It is mine. Move. Jacob didn't need to be told twice. He followed her into the tunnel just as the trapdoor above them shattered. A harsh, mechanical voice echoed through the shelter. Target detected. Pursuit initiated. Jacob's stomach dropped. What the hell are these things? Araya didn't slow down. Hurry. The tunnel was narrow and cold, with jagged walls that looked like they had been carved out in a hurry. Jacob's breath came in short, panicked gasps as they ran. Behind them, the sound of metallic footsteps echoed louder, closer. How do they know where we are? Jacob panted. They can't see us, right? They do not need to see, Araya replied. They track energy signatures, movement, heat. They are predators. Efficient. Relentless. Fantastic, Jacob muttered. We're being hunted by intergalactic bloodhounds. The tunnel suddenly opened up into a vast underground chamber. Strange, glowing crystals jutted from the walls, casting an otherworldly light over the space. Jacob stumbled to a halt, his eyes wide. What is this place? He asked. Araya didn't answer immediately. She moved to the center of the chamber, her hands brushing against the crystals as if she were searching for something. Finally, she stopped and turned to him. This was once a sanctuary, she said, a place of safety for those like me, but it has been abandoned for decades. Great, Jacob said, throwing up his hands. So, what's the plan now? Hide here until they give up. They will not give up, Araya said firmly. But we can slow them down. She placed both hands on one of the larger crystals and closed her eyes. The crystal began to pulse with light, and a deep resonating hum filled the chamber. Jacob felt the ground vibrate beneath his feet. "What are you doing?" he asked nervously. "Activating a defense mechanism," she said. "The energy from these crystals will overload their sensors. It will buy us time." "Time for what?" "To escape," she said simply. Jacob shook his head. "Escape where?" "They're tracking you across the planet, and I'm pretty sure I'm on their hit list now too." Araya's expression softened, just for a moment. "I did not intend for you to be involved in this, but now that you are, I will not let them harm you." Before Jacob could respond, a deafening roar filled the chamber. The tunnel they had just come through collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. The hunters were forcing their way through. "It's now or never," Araya said. She grabbed Jacob's arm and pulled him toward a smaller tunnel on the far side of the chamber. "This way." Jacob stumbled after her, his heart pounding. As they disappeared into the darkness, the chamber behind them erupted in a blinding flash of light. The sound of mechanical howls and screeches filled the air as the crystal defense activated, disrupting the hunter systems. For now, they had a head start. But Jacob knew this wasn't over. Whoever, or whatever, was chasing them wasn't going to stop until they had Araya. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, they were after him too. He glanced at Araya as they ran. "You'd better be worth all this trouble, lady." Her glowing eyes met his, fierce and determined. "Trust me, I am." The alien's purpose. Jacob Harris wasn't used to silence this deep, this overwhelming. The tunnel they escaped into stretched endlessly, lit only by the faint glow of the strange alien tech Araya carried. His breathing echoed back at him. But Araya moved with an eerie calm, her every step purposeful. "How much farther?" Jacob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Far enough to talk," Araya replied. She stopped suddenly, turning to him. The light from her device illuminated her face, calm, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. "You deserve answers." "Damn right I do." Jacob leaned against the tunnel wall, still catching his breath. "You dropped into my life like some cosmic bomb. Now I'm running from killer robots, and God knows what else." "Who are you? What's really going on?" Araya hesitated, as if deciding how much to tell him. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but tinged with regret. "I am Araya Tavella of Velcaris, a diplomat. My mission was simple: negotiate peace between warring factions in my galaxy. But the meeting was a trap. I uncovered something that powerful forces want to keep hidden." Jacob frowned. "What could be so dangerous it's worth sending? Whatever those things are after you." Araya's gaze hardened. "A conspiracy that stretches across galaxies. Earth is not isolated. It is watched, manipulated, exploited." Jacob blinked. "Exploited? By who?" "Corporations, governments, shadowy factions," Araya said. "Your world is a pawn in a much larger game. Resources, technology, even your people, they are traded like commodities." Jacob's mind reeled. "And you know this. How?" Araya held up her glowing device. "This contains data from the meeting. Evidence of the conspiracy. If it reaches the wrong hands, Earth's future is sealed. But if the truth is exposed, your planet could become an ally to my people. A force to be reckoned with." Jacob let out a bitter laugh. "Lady, I'm a mechanic. What am I supposed to do with all this galactic politics nonsense? Call the president." "You are involved now," Araya said sharply. "You must decide. Run and let them destroy everything, or help me expose the truth." Jacob opened his mouth to argue, but a distant sound stopped him cold. A low, rhythmic hum echoed through the tunnel. Araya's expression darkened. "They'd found us." Jacob cursed under his breath. "How?" "You said the crystals would throw them off." "They adapt quickly," Araya said. We need to move. Now." Before Jacob could protest, she grabbed his arm and pulled him deeper into the tunnel. The hum grew louder, more menacing, as if the very air vibrated with the sound of their hunters closing in. The tunnel suddenly opened into a cavern. It wasn't natural. Jacob could tell that much. The walls were smooth, lined with strange, glowing markings that pulsed faintly as they entered. At the center stood a pedestal, and atop it, a metallic orb hovered, spinning slowly in the air. "What is this place?" Jacob asked, staring in awe. "A Velkarian relay station," Araya said. She approached the pedestal and placed her device next to the orb. "This was built centuries ago to communicate across galaxies. If I can activate it, we can send the data to an ally." Jacob glanced nervously back toward the tunnel. The hum was closer now, accompanied by the sound of scraping metal and the occasional bone-chilling screech. "How long is that gonna take?" Araya didn't answer. Her hands moved quickly over the pedestal, the orb lighting up in response. Symbols floated in the air around her, shifting and rearranging as she worked. "Araya," Jacob hissed, "we don't have time for this." "They are nearly here," she said, her voice steady. "Keep them off me. I just need a few minutes." Jacob turned toward the tunnel, his stomach knotting. He didn't have a weapon, and he wasn't a fighter. But as the first shadowy figure appeared at the tunnel's entrance, a hulking, humanoid shape with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp limbs, he realized he didn't have a choice. "Fantastic," he muttered. Grabbing a loose piece of pipe from the cavern floor, he squared his shoulders. "Guess I'm doing this." The hunter lunged, its movements unnaturally fast. Jacob barely dodged in time, swinging the pipe wildly. It connected with a sickening crunch, but the creature barely flinched. Its head snapped toward him, and for a moment, Jacob was certain he was dead. Then a blinding light filled the cavern. The hunter shrieked, its body convulsing before collapsing into a heap of smoking metal. Jacob turned to see Araya, her hand extended and glowing with the same energy that had just saved his life. "Get to the relay," she shouted. "I'll handle the rest." No arguments here. Jacob bolted toward the pedestal, but before he could reach it, the tunnel behind them erupted in a cacophony of screeches. More hunters poured into the cavern, their eyes locked on Araya. She stood her ground, her body glowing brighter with every passing second. Jacob watched in awe as she unleashed a wave of energy, sending several hunters flying. But there were too many. For every one she struck down, two more took its place. "Hurry," Araya shouted, her voice strained. Jacob grabbed the orb, his hands shaking. "What do I do?" "Just hold it," she said. "It will know." The moment his hands touched the orb, a surge of energy coursed through him. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he saw everything. Stars, galaxies, planets, an entire universe connected by invisible threads. And at the center of it all, Earth, small but shining brightly. The orb pulsed, and Jacob felt a strange certainty settle over him. Whatever this fight was, it wasn't just about Araya. It was about humanity, about survival. And he wasn't going to let them lose. Earth's dark secret. The night sky above the abandoned factory was eerily still, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing inside. Jacob crouched behind a rusted conveyor belt, sweat dripping down his face. Beside him, Araya worked furiously, her glowing fingers dancing over a holographic interface that seemed to materialize out of thin air. "Are you sure this is where we'll find it?" Jacob whispered, his voice tense. He kept glancing toward the shattered windows above, where faint red lights flickered in the distance, search drones sweeping the area. Araya didn't look up. "This facility holds records connecting Earth's leaders to the Galactic conspiracy. If we don't retrieve them, your planet's fate is sealed." Jacob gritted his teeth. "You say that like it's my fault." "It is not your fault," Araya said evenly. "But it is your responsibility now. You are already part of this." Jacob opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the factory, cutting him off. He froze. The hunters were here. "They're getting closer," he hissed. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." "I am bypassing a centuries-old encryption system," Araya said, her tone clipped. "This is not a process that can be rushed." Jacob peered around the conveyor belt. The hunters moved with mechanical precision, their bodies sleek and metallic, their glowing red eyes scanning every shadow. He tightened his grip on the makeshift weapon in his hand. A wrench he'd grabbed on their way in. It felt laughably inadequate. Suddenly, Araya stiffened. "I'm in." A holographic screen expanded in front of her, displaying rows of data in a language Jacob couldn't read. Araya's eyes darted over the symbols, her expression growing darker by the second. "What is it?" Jacob asked. She hesitated, then turned to him. "Your planet's leaders have been trading your resources, water, minerals, even human labor, in exchange for alien technology. They have known about the galactic community for decades, but chose secrecy to maintain control." Jacob's stomach twisted. "You're saying Earth sold itself out?" "Not Earth," Araya corrected. "Your leaders. They see their people as expendable. They have aligned with forces that will strip your planet bare, leaving nothing behind." Jacob leaned against the conveyor belt, his mind reeling. He had always known Earth was corrupt. Greedy politicians, shady corporations, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. His world wasn't just broken. It was a pawn in a game far bigger than he'd ever dreamed. Araya stood abruptly. "I've extracted the evidence. We need to leave." Jacob glanced toward the hunters. Easier said than done. The closest hunter spotted them. Its red eyes flared, and it let out an ear-piercing screech, alerting the others. Jacob felt his body tense as more hunters turned in their direction, their sleek forms reflecting the dim light. "Run," Araya said, her voice calm but firm. Jacob didn't argue. He bolted toward the back of the factory, Araya close behind him. The hunters moved fast, their heavy steps echoing like thunder. Jacob's heart pounded as they dodged piles of debris and rusted machinery, every shadow a potential death sentence. As they reached the exit, a hunter leaped in front of them, blocking their path. Its razor-sharp limbs gleamed, and it let out a guttural growl that sent chills down Jacob's spine. Araya stepped forward, her hand glowing with energy. "Keep moving. I will handle this." "Are you crazy?" Jacob shouted. "You can't take that thing alone." She turned to him, her violet eyes blazing. "Trust me. Go." Jacob hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Don't die on me, Araya." With that, he sprinted toward the emergency exit. Behind him, he heard the sound of energy blasts and metallic shrieks. He didn't dare look back. Bursting through the door, Jacob found himself in an overgrown alleyway. He stopped to catch his breath, his hands on his knees. The sound of distant explosions told him Araya was still fighting. He clenched his fists, guilt gnawing at him. He hated leaving her behind, but she had made her choice. Before he could think of what to do next, the ground beneath his feet shook violently. A deep, rumbling sound filled the air, and Jacob looked up just in time to see a massive ship descending from the clouds. Its sleek, black hull reflected the city lights, and its engines hummed with a menacing power. "What the hell is that?" Jacob whispered. A voice crackled to life in his earpiece, a device Araya had given him earlier. "Jacob, the ship is here for the data. Do not let them capture it." "Great," Jacob muttered. "No pressure." The ship's landing ramp began to lower, and figures in sleek, armored suits marched out. Jacob's mind raced. He had no weapons, no backup, and no plan. But he had the data, proof of Earth's betrayal. And he wasn't about to let it fall into the wrong hands. As the soldiers advanced, Jacob's earpiece crackled again. "There's a hidden transport nearby," Araya said, her voice strained. "I'm sending you the coordinates. Go." Jacob took off, weaving through the alleyways as the soldiers pursued him. His legs burned, and his lungs felt like they might burst, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The transport was hidden beneath a crumbling overpass, a sleek alien craft that hummed to life as Jacob approached. He climbed aboard, the controls lighting up under his touch. "Where's Araya?" he shouted into the earpiece. "I'm close," she replied. "Take off. I'll catch up." Jacob hesitated, his hands hovering over the controls. He didn't want to leave her, but the sound of soldiers closing in made the decision for him. Gritting his teeth, he activated the ship's engines and soared into the sky, the data clutched tightly in his hands. As the city disappeared below him, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Alliance of the unlikely. The old safe house was a relic from another era, a crumbling military bunker buried deep in the desert. Jacob sat on the edge of a dented metal cot, rubbing his temples. The room smelled of rust and dust, and the hum of ancient generators droned in the background. Across from him, Araya was slumped against the wall, her glow dimmer than usual. She had barely spoken since they escaped the factory. The battle had drained her, and her breathing was shallow. The tension between them was palpable, but Jacob had bigger problems. The silence broke with the sound of boots echoing down the corridor. Jacob shot to his feet, grabbing the nearest weapon, a bent crowbar. The door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped inside, still swinging junk around. The voice was familiar, laced with a mix of sarcasm and disdain. Jacob froze. Ethan. Standing in the doorway was Ethan Harris, Jacob's older brother. His military uniform was long gone, replaced by civilian clothes that looked too clean for someone in hiding. His face was harder now, more weathered, but his sharp green eyes hadn't changed. "What are you doing here?" Jacob asked, his grip on the crowbar tightening. Ethan smirked. "I could ask you the same thing, little brother. Last I heard, you were fixing junkers in some backwater garage. Now you're the talk of half a dozen intergalactic hit squads." Jacob lowered the crowbar, but didn't relax. Araya sent a signal. You were the only one who responded. Ethan's eyes flicked to Araya, who was watching him with quiet suspicion. "And who's this?" "Another one of your bad decisions. Her name's Araya," Jacob snapped. "And she's the reason we're not dead. Mostly." Ethan's smirk faded as he stepped closer, his gaze hardening. "You're in deep, Jacob. These aren't just bounty hunters you're dealing with. You've got entire governments and corporations gunning for you. So why shouldn't I turn you in and collect the reward?" Jacob glared at him. "Because you still have a shred of decency left. Or am I wrong?" The tension between them hung thick in the air, but then Ethan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "You always did know how to guilt-trip me. Fine. I'll help you. For now." Araya's faint voice broke the moment. "We don't need your help if you cannot be trusted." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "She talks. Good to know." "She's not wrong," Jacob said. "What's your angle, Ethan? Why are you here?" Ethan leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "I'm here because I've seen what's coming. Earth's leaders have been playing this game for years, thinking they could stay one step ahead. But now they've made a mistake. They've let people like me, people who know too much, slip through the cracks. I'm not helping you because I care, Jacob. I'm helping because if these bastards win, we all lose." Araya studied Ethan for a long moment, her glowing eyes narrowing. "If we are to trust you, prove it. Help us access the archives." Ethan snorted. "You mean the archives buried under Orbital Station Gamma?" "Yeah, no problem. I'll just waltz in, wave to the guards, and grab classified data for you." Jacob frowned. "You know about the archives?" "Of course I do," Ethan said. "I used to guard them. That's why I know it's a suicide mission." "Not if we work together," Araya said firmly. "I can bypass their systems, and Jacob can." "Jacob can what?" Ethan interrupted, smirking. "Carry the snacks. Look, I'm in, but let's be real. He's dead weight." Jacob bristled. I'm standing right here, you know. Good, Ethan said. Then hear this. If we're doing this, we do it my way. No heroics, no screw-ups. Got it. Araya glanced at Jacob, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded. Agreed. Your experience will be useful. Jacob threw up his hands. Great. Glad we're all getting along. Ethan turned serious. We leave at dawn. Get some rest. You're going to need it. Hours later, Jacob found himself staring at the bunker's ceiling, unable to sleep. Araya's faint glow lit the room, casting strange shadows on the walls. He turned to her, lowering his voice so Ethan wouldn't hear. Do you trust him? Jacob asked. No, Araya said without hesitation. But trust is a luxury we cannot afford. If he can help us, we use him. Jacob nodded, though the thought didn't sit well with him. What happens if this doesn't work? If we can't get the data? Araya met his gaze, her violet eyes steady. Then we fight another way. Giving up is not an option. Jacob sighed. Easy for you to say. You're the superpowered alien diplomat. I'm just a guy with a wrench. A faint smile touched her lips. Even the smallest tool can build great things, Jacob Harris. Before he could respond, Ethan's voice called from the next room. If you two are done bonding, get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hell. Jacob groaned. Can't wait. As the bunker fell quiet again, Jacob felt a strange mix of dread and determination settle over him. Tomorrow, they would face impossible odds. But for the first time, he wasn't running. He was ready to fight. Sacrifice and betrayal. The air inside the orbital station was cold and sterile, its metal corridors humming faintly with the energy of hidden machinery. Jacob's footsteps echoed as he followed Ethan through the labyrinth of gleaming walls. His grip tightened on the stolen ID badge hanging around his neck, his stomach twisting into knots. This place gives me the creeps, Jacob muttered. Ethan glanced back at him, his expression unreadable. Focus. The archives are on the lower level. Stick to the plan, and we might just get out of here alive. Jacob didn't feel reassured. Araya was a few steps ahead, her violet eyes scanning the walls, her fingers brushing against hidden control panels. She moved with a precision that made Jacob wonder just how much she wasn't telling him. I've accessed the layout, Araya said softly. The archives are 2 levels down, but the security grid is more complex than I anticipated. It will take time to disable. Time we don't have, Ethan said. We need to move. Jacob's unease grew. Something about Ethan's tone felt off. He'd been acting strange ever since they docked at the station. More serious, more distant. Jacob pushed the thought aside. They didn't have the luxury of doubt right now. As they descended to the lower level, the atmosphere shifted. The sterile hum was replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional beep of sensors. The archives loomed ahead, a massive reinforced door with glowing red glyphs that pulsed like a heartbeat. Araya knelt before the door, her hands glowing as she worked to dismantle the security grid. This will take at least 5 minutes. Cover me. Jacob nodded and turned to Ethan. You've done this kind of thing before, right? Got any tips? Yeah, Ethan said, his voice colder than usual. Don't get in my way. Jacob frowned but didn't press him. Instead, he gripped the blaster Ethan had handed him earlier, the weight of it unfamiliar in his hands. He had never used a weapon before, and the thought of needing to made his stomach churn. Araya's voice cut through his thoughts. The door is almost. She stopped, her hands freezing mid-movement. Jacob turned to her, alarmed. What's wrong? Araya's glowing eyes narrowed. Someone is overriding my commands. The station's central eye has detected us. Ethan cursed under his breath. Great. Now we got company. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Jacob's heart raced as he raised the blaster, his hands shaking. What do we do? Hold them off, Ethan said, his voice sharp. I'll handle the eye. Jacob hesitated. How? You're not exactly a hacker. Ethan's expression darkened. I have my ways. Just keep them busy. Before Jacob could respond, Ethan disappeared down a side corridor. Jacob turned to Araya, panic creeping into his voice. Can he really do it? Araya's expression was unreadable. I do not trust him, but we have no choice. Stay focused. The first wave of attackers appeared. Station guards clad in sleek armor, their weapons glowing ominously. Jacob's instincts screamed at him to run, but Araya's calm presence steadied him. Together, they held the line, their movements a desperate dance of survival. The battle was chaos. Blaster fire lit up the corridor, the air thick with the smell of scorched metal. Jacob's arms ached as he fired wildly, his aim barely controlled. Araya moved with otherworldly grace, her energy blasts precise and devastating. And then, just as the last guard fell, the archive door hissed open. We're in, Araya said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Jacob didn't waste a second. He followed her inside, the sight of the archive room stealing his breath. Rows upon rows of glowing data cores stretched into the distance, each one humming with the secrets of countless worlds. This is it, Araya said, her hands moving over the nearest console. The truth. But before she could begin the download, a familiar voice filled the room. Step away. Jacob spun around to see Ethan standing in the doorway, a blaster in one hand and a data core in the other. His expression was cold, his eyes sharp. What are you doing? Jacob demanded. We're on the same side. Ethan smirked, but there was no humor in it. No, Jacob. We never were. Araya's voice was calm but firm. You intend to sell the data. Ethan shrugged. Why not? This conspiracy is bigger than any of us. No one's going to stop it. But with the right buyer, I can disappear and live comfortably for the rest of my life. Jacob felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. You're betraying us. After everything. Ethan's smirk faltered. And for a moment, guilt flickered in his eyes. It's not personal, Jacob. It's survival. Before Jacob could react, Ethan raised his blaster. Araya moved faster. A wave of energy knocked the weapon from Ethan's hand, sending him staggering back. You will not succeed, Araya said, her voice like steel. Ethan glared at her, then at Jacob. You think you can win this? You're a fool. Both of you. Jacob stepped forward, his voice trembling with anger. Maybe. But at least we're not cowards. For a moment, it looked like Ethan might fight back. But then he turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows. Jacob let out a shaky breath, his hands trembling. What now? He asked, turning to Araya. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she finished the download and removed the data core. Now we reveal the truth. Jacob nodded, his determination hardening. Whatever came next, they were ready. Together, humanity's shining moment. The stolen transport ship streaked through the dark expanse of space, its engines humming with a strained urgency. Jacob sat in the cockpit, his knuckles white, as he gripped the controls. Beside him, Araya's glow was faint, her usually vibrant violet eyes dull and tired. The data core, a pulsating, crystalline device, sat between them, its light casting eerie shadows in the cramped cabin. You're sure this plan will work? Jacob asked, his voice tight. It must, Araya replied. Her voice was steady, but Jacob could hear the exhaustion beneath it. The Galactic Nexus is the only place where this information can reach every system. If we fail, the conspiracy will continue unchecked. Jacob glanced at the navigation panel. They were minutes away from the Nexus, an enormous station that served as the hub of intergalactic communication and governance. But they weren't the only ones headed there. The enemy ships on their tail weren't subtle, and the warning alarms in the cockpit confirmed they were closing in fast. Fantastic, Jacob muttered. We're racing against the universe's worst, and this bucket of bolts isn't exactly built for speed. Araya placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch cool and calming. You've done more than anyone could have asked, Jacob. Humanity owes you its future. Jacob snorted. Let's not start writing the victory speeches just yet. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently, and a warning blared across the console. One of the enemy ships had locked onto them, its energy cannons firing in bursts that lit up the surrounding space. "We're hit," Jacob yelled, struggling to keep the ship steady. "Hold course," Araya said, her tone sharp. "We must reach the Nexus." Jacob gritted his teeth and pushed the engines to their limit. The Nexus came into view, a colossal, ring-shaped structure orbiting a gas giant, its surface glittering with millions of lights. It was the largest station in the galaxy, and once they were inside its protected airspace, their pursuers would have to back off. "Almost there," Jacob said, his voice strained. Another blast rocked the ship, and sparks flew from the control panel. Alarms screamed in protest, and the ship began to lose altitude. Araya unstrapped herself and moved toward the data core, her expression resolute. "What are you doing?" Jacob demanded. "Ensuring the mission succeeds," Araya said. She opened a compartment near the core, revealing a sleek, cylindrical device. "This beacon will transmit the data directly to the Nexus network, but it requires manual activation." Jacob's stomach twisted. "Manual? You mean you have to stay behind?" She met his gaze, her expression softening. "It is my duty, Jacob. This is my fight as much as it is yours." "Like hell it is," Jacob shouted. "We've come this far together. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself." Araya hesitated, a flicker of emotion crossing her face. "Your courage has brought us this far. But if I do not act, all we fought for will be lost." Before Jacob could argue, the ship jolted again, and the Nexus loomed closer. The comms panel crackled to life, and a voice from the station spoke. "Unidentified vessel. This is Nexus Control. You are entering protected space. Identify yourself immediately." Jacob slammed his hand on the comms. "This is Jacob Harris, Earth civilian. We're carrying critical data. Evidence of a galactic conspiracy. We need to dock now." There was a pause, then. "You are cleared to proceed. Security forces are being dispatched to intercept your pursuers." Relief washed over Jacob, but it was short-lived. The enemy ships weren't retreating. They were accelerating, intent on stopping them before they could reach the docking bay. "Jacob," Araya said softly. He turned to her, and her glow was brighter now, her eyes filled with an almost serene determination. "You must go." He shook his head. "No, we'll figure something out. We always do." She stepped closer, placing a hand on his cheek. "You have given me hope, Jacob. For my people. For yours. Now I must do the same for you." Before he could stop her, she activated the beacon and turned toward the airlock. The ship shuddered again, alarms blaring, but her movements were steady as she prepared to eject the core and herself into open space. "Araya," Jacob yelled, scrambling to follow her. She looked back one last time, a faint smile on her lips. "Humanity is stronger than you know, Jacob Harris. Show them." And with that, she was gone. The airlock sealed, and through the small viewport, Jacob watched as Araya and the beacon drifted toward the Nexus, her glowing form disappearing into the light. The ship's autopilot engaged, guiding it to safety. Jacob collapsed into the pilot's seat, his chest heaving with grief and anger. He barely registered the comms crackling again, this time with voices from the Nexus. "The data is coming through. It's incredible. This changes everything." Jacob closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He had done it. They had done it. The truth was out, and the galaxy would never be the same. But it had come at a cost. As the Nexus loomed larger in the viewport, Jacob clenched his fists. Araya's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. Humanity's future was brighter now, and for the first time, Jacob felt a glimmer of hope that they could rise to meet it.